much for spending some time with us this afternoon to talk about precision fermentation. You're going to get a master class. Isn't that exciting here at Supply Side West and Food Ingredients North America? I'm Sandy Almendares. I am Vice President of Content at Supply Side. I've got a few show announcements before we get started. Please scan that QR code right there. You'll get the mobile app, which helps you plan your schedule, and it also is where you can get the slides from today's presentation. Just go to the session, go to the schedule, go to this session, look at the documents place, and you'll see the slides. Of course, you can always take pictures of the slides I know some people like to have them on their phone. That's fine. And there's the Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is always good. And the expo hall is open until 5 o'clock today. To get us in the mood here, I've got some stats. The global precision fermentation ingredient market was valued at $3.24 billion in USD, and that was in 2023. And it's anticipated to meet 120 billion by 2023. So that's a CAGR of 43%. The reason behind this is because there's rising veganism, because these products are tasting better and better with every iteration. And people want more availability and protein and different types of ingredients in their food. And consumer acceptance, we're finding, is increasingly increasing with these types of products, especially among millennials and Gen Z shoppers. So there's really a ton of opportunity in this space. And since it is so new and for many a novel technology, it's really important that brands are doing it the right way and following all of the safety measures and understand the reason and the science behind these products. And so that's what you're here today to learn about from very top experts in the field. We're going to start with Baljit Gotra, excuse me. He is the CEO, he's the co-founder and co-CEO of Equi, and then after that we'll have Andrew Charette, who is the Director of Regulatory Affairs and a psychedelic advisor at KGK Science. I love that title, and I'm going to talk to my boss about getting that for myself. All right, Baljit, please come up. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, you come up and I'll talk about the goals and objectives. We're going to learn about the technology, the formulation benefits and challenges, scaling operations, costs. Everyone wants to know how much it costs, and regulatory requirements and considerations. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go. Yay.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Sandy, for the introduction. So today, we'll be talking about fermentation technology. So fermentation technology is a powerful technique that is shaping the way we are approaching how to produce food and sustainability. Is it okay? Phone call, yeah. And today we will talk about some of the challenges and also some of the great opportunities that are there with this technology. I have been fortunate to work deeper into the manufacturing of food ingredients, particularly proteins by fermentation in the startup Equi that I started with my co-founder. And so this has led me to really understand the evolving technology of fermentation and how it's going to be used with, of course, there are challenges, and some of those challenges, how we will overcome those challenges. The biggest criteria of a successful technology is the adoption. And we all know that. Adoption is not only just based on taste or healthier foods, but it also is dependent on affordability. And affordability is dependent on how the product is produced and sold, all the operational costs. Sandy mentioned earlier that all of these green technologies to make food ingredients are showing a lot of growth. Uh, at least the projections are very high. And I used a couple of the agencies that they predicted growth of almost up to 36 to 57 billion dollars. All of these fermentation-based technologies. But you can see in 2023, 2024, where the sales has been very sluggish because of the consumer is not accepting many of those products. It's because of either cost or many other reasons that I'm going to go deeper into. And these are some of the major constraints that you can categorize under three major categories, like manufacturing cost, taste, texture, and flavor. We saw plant proteins in 2016. We saw the upswing, and then it didn't hit the mark with the consumer on taste and texture. And I have some of the examples I'll share with you. And then the scale-up challenges is the key one. Many times a product is acceptable, but the cost is very high because the scaling up is a bigger issue. But we continue to believe at Equi that fermentation is still a great enabler for us to overcome these challenges. So there are three kinds of fermentation. We're all aware of that, but I just want to put it out there so that we build a base case of biomass fermentation. And there are some companies like Nature's Find, Meaty, they're using biomass fermentation. Precision fermentation is used already by Perfect Day and many other companies like Geltor, Every. And we're going to go deeper into some of the advantages and disadvantages of these techniques. First of all, the ingredient cost. Cost is directly related to the purity of ingredients. You want more pure ingredient, cost is going to be higher. And this is really one of the area where biomass fermentation really enables you to tailor that cost. Biomass fermentation allows you to have lower production costs than precision fermentation. It's technically based on you can tailor how much of the purity you need. You need 60% protein purity versus 80% pure protein purity is going to be really defining what unit operations you're going to put in your downstream processing. CapEx can be very high. At the same time, your cost is going to be higher just because of the operational costs. And then I want to use one example here for one of the meat alternative products where a biomass fermentation enables you not only get the lower cost, but also a better ingredient deck, for example. And this is, everyone's familiar with Beyond Burger. As you go from Beyond Burger to Meaty, so you can see that in 2016, products came out with the long ingredient deck that's like Beyond Burger or Impossible Foods. One of the things you will notice that as you use the highly pure ingredients like pea proteins or others, you still need to functionalize the product. So you're adding more additives, your ingredient list gets longer, and then you can see the fat content is 14 grams, 5 grams saturated fat. Now you go to all the way to Meaty, what they did brilliantly was biomass fermentation. The protein is high, but also the dietary fiber is very high. And you can see they can eliminate fats, it's not needed. And it's still highly nutrient dense, and ingredient deck is very small. So what is the benefit of this kind of ingredient development is really to leverage biomanufacturing scale up very easily. These unit operations for there's a long list here, but I just want to focus on process design today just because of time. But process design, now process design is really dependent on what's the purity of your ingredient, and what is the volume of the product you're going to be manufacturing. These are the two critical aspects there. And when it comes to cost and in biomanufacturing, size does matter. You have a larger batches of production, your cost goes down. And this is an example of one of our protein based on yeast organism that we ferment and then we do the purification in the downstream. We were at $10 per kilo. That was at very low volumes. As you increase it to all the way to 2,000 tons, we are projecting the cost to be about $7. So that's a typical batch process. But there are more cost savings possible in fermentation. As you think of making volumes of like 30,000 metric tons, what you do? And it's highly dependent on organism, but also on the product type that allows you to go from batch to continuous fermentation. And I'll share some examples who are using continuous fermentation to really make an affordable protein product, for example. And here, typical example, and this is one of the model that we are using in our company, where we could go down to the cost almost like $5 a kilo if you produce at those high volumes. So again, it's a busy slide, but I wanted to discuss that in batch process has some disadvantages and some advantages. The disadvantages is as you increase the volume, there could be a buildup of some inhibitory toxins that can be produced because of the stress on the organism. And that is also reported in some fermentation where how the mycoprotein is made by mycelium organism. And also in continuous fermentation also has some disadvantages. It's very difficult to maintain a steady state. And one of the example here I'm sharing is from Marlowe Foods back in 1980s. They came up with a continuous fermentation. And really, if you see the graph there, you're continuously harvesting the biomass. And these processes can run up to 20 days. And after 20 days, you have to stop the process and restart it. But for 20 days, you have a steady state process. And this has been successfully done by Marlowe Foods. And then, of course, I want to go back to the checklist. This is the last slide. But here, this slide here just summarizes how some of the companies have really used the biomass fermentation to make cost effectively make the protein ingredient. Of course, site selection is very important. Everyone knows that. But the more important is really assessing what type of purity you need in your ingredient. Can 60% work versus 80%? That will help you to design a plant with much lower capex. And also your cost of product per kilo will be lower also. And the other one is the side stream valorization. Recently, and this is in the reports I captured from one of the publication where like 3F Bio is making mycoprotein, and they're valorizing all the side streams. And when you valorize the side streams, you reduce the cost of your operation significantly. So that's one of the things, a lot of these new fermentation companies are not able to do that because to valorize a stream requires a better site selection also. If your site selection, if you're in a remote area, how are you going to valorize the stream? You need a home for it. So that's a very, very critical consideration. And finally, the batch and the continuous methods. And it's highly product specific, organism specific, but these are very important to explore as we look at the fermentation techniques. With that, I'll stop here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Baljit. I told you it was going to be a masterclass, all of that information. There will be some time for Q&A at the end, so we'll invite Andrew up now to do his presentation. Make sure you get the clicker. Wonderful.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I'm going to be covering the case-by-case approach that's required for preparing a regulatory filing for products of precision fermentation. So when we talk about novel articles of food, we're talking about typically two regulatory pathways that need to be undertaken, either the GRAS pathway or a food additive pathway. Today we're going to focus on the GRAS pathway, which can include either a self-affirmed GRAS conclusion or an FDA notified grass. I thought I'd also mention livestock feed, a feed grass, as we're going to focus on human food, but there could be livestock feed produced in this method. When we are engaging with clients, it's typically doing so in series. So first getting that self-grass done so that you can get the product to market, and then thinking about, based on business decisions, whether or not to pursue the FDA notification route. When we talk about a grass dossier, or any safety dossier for a food ingredient, it's typically 50% identity information and 50% safety. Even though we refer to them as safety information, the identity portion is critical, and with the complexity of a precision fermentation production system, it's very important, even more so important than sort of your standard ingredients. So when we're talking about identity, we're talking about characterizing the inputs, the manufacturing method, the end product, but also with some of the specific things with precision fermentation, the genomic and sequence of the biovector, of the gene that you're producing, amino acid sequence if it's protein-based, the manufacturing methods, controls, contaminants, and allergens. And on the safety side, these products are still subject to the same requirements for safety as any other ingredient, but there are other considerations such as virulence and toxigenic factors from the production organism, some additional things to think about in addition to your standard gene tox or rodent toxicology studies that are required. So when we engage with precision fermentation products in particular, it's really important to think about the timing of when you're going to engage on doing the studies to pursue a grass. So when we engage with a client, it's usually at the pilot scale production, so they're already at producing at bench scale, and the idea is to engage on the regulatory start. Now that you can have some product and produce it, start doing the studies that you need to do in line with your scale-up procedures so that you can get to market as soon as possible, which totally makes sense. The most common pitfall that we've encountered are companies being a little too eager to move forward with some things. There's certain studies that should be done in series and some that can be done in parallel. And what we have found is that the uncertainties can arise during the scale-up procedures, which cause a company to have to go back to some of the basics around in the worst case, some of their production organism selection, or some of the other critical factors in the production system. And that can have effects on the end product. And sometimes those effects can be severe enough that some of the data they've collected so far is no longer applicable, and they have to redo some of that work. And that's really the worst case. That's what we try to avoid. So it's really about defining the plan up front with a regulatory consultant, if you're using one, to sort of map out what the gaps are, what studies need to be done, and what the dependencies are that would trigger the start of that study, not just running everything you can as fast as you can, just so that you can avoid some issues and really make sure you have it defined as to when you feel confident that you're going to be able to scale the product that you have now is going to be what you're producing when you're at commercial scale production. The case-by-case element of precision fermentation ingredients is very apparent and very different from typical standard ingredients. I don't know what to refer them as, but because the production systems are unique, there's a myriad of variables that could go into the biovector itself, the gene that's being produced, the fermentation media, and the conditions of production. These things can all have effects on what's being produced, and can therefore have unique requirements to that specific ingredient. So it all sort of starts with selecting the organism, the biovector that you're going to be using. And in that case, wherever possible, you want to use something that's already been used in a grass, because there can be, if you're using a new production organism, there may be additional safety information or characterization that you need to do that could be something that you could skip if it's something that's already been used in a grass. And there's also, considerations, I guess, from the finished product manufacturer, the perception of what they may think of that production organism as well. Other things to think about when you're sort of upfront are processing aids in your fermentation media. The common one we run into is antifoams that are used. Need to make sure that they are food grade and that they're grass. Ideally, they've been given grass for the use that you're using them for. Also need to think about your sort of cleanup methods at the end, heat treatment, and the filtration, the effectiveness of those, and the whether or not food grade materials are being used in those systems. The things that we encounter that are sort of one-offs, or not one-offs, but they're common, but they're unique, I guess, to precision fermentation or biomass production, is the biggest one that we run into is endotoxin production. It's important to think about. A lot of folks don't think about that very much up front, but if the organisms are stressed, or certain organisms produce endotoxins at high levels, it's something to be aware of. It's testing that will be required, that you have to do. We've run into bioplastics, more so on biomass production, but those are more of environmental consideration. Allergenicity from the production organism remnants is a big thing, and it can be tricky in terms of testing if you do have a lot of that present. Other things are off-target metabolites, reactive oxygen ROS, biogenic amines, and then a big one is antibiotic residues. So you need, if you're selecting for your organism using antibiotics, you really should be running that by a regulatory consultant to make sure you're not using something that you shouldn't be and that it's not present in the finished product. So at KGK, we often talk about the path and the proof and like to separate things in that way. Here we talk about early identification. When you're going into a self-GRAS, in terms of your path, we like to identify early what the conditions of use of your ingredient are going to be, and whether or not you plan to expand that in the future. It really defines several things down the line in terms of the safety analysis and your exposure analysis, how much product per serving level you're going to be able to include in your GRAS, and then also whether or not you're going to pursue an FDA GRAS down the line as well. In terms of the proof, as I mentioned, you don't want to jump the gun on expensive studies. So something like a 90-day rodent toxicology study, it takes the longest, and it's most tempting to, you're going to need to do it. It's the most tempting to jump in and start it, and that's the one that you don't want to have to redo because it's expensive and takes a long time. So, so typically you have your, making sure that your system is working well, and then start to characterize safety and validation down the line, which you can do in parallel with scale-up procedures. It's just making sure you're confident you're not going to run into something that puts you back to rethinking the basics. And then expertise, working with somebody who is familiar with these types of products and knows what to look for, because not everything is super evident in terms of potential toxigenic factors or something that are coming from a particular production system. And yeah, I think that's it. Thanks.
Is this working? Hello. Yeah, I'll actually invite Andrew and Baljeet to come back up for Q&A. So everyone think about the questions you want to ask as I take us home on these slides. So the takeaways from this session is there's a ton of opportunity here for brands to provide really cool, innovative products. And those who decide to go into this area need to ensure that they're managing their costs, taste, texture, flavor, and scale up. Just like any other product, it's really important, and you don't want to dive in too quickly before you know the path, right? As Andrew was just saying. And it requires a careful approach to product safety and regulatory compliance. And if you just want more, because this was only a 30-minute masterclass, we have the next slide. Where do I even point this? There's no next slide? Oh. Well, I had a lovely QR code. Here we have the next slide. And so last year here at this show, at Supply Side West, we had a longer 3-hour presentation on precision fermentation, and you can learn more. You can watch the video from last year. We had a Belgian colleague was on that panel as well. Okay, thank you. We've got some time for questions. Okay, I know you have a question. Don't be embarrassed. I knew it. Okay, Jen's running the mic, please. Oh.
What's the use in beverage? Fermentation in the future of beverage. There's the previous slide. Can you go back, please?
We put it at the beginning for the Q&A, so you have to go to the very end.
What?
I think it's they're saying
this
it's
slide?
the first slide, not the last one.
First slide.
So fermentation's role in the future of food and beverage.
Oh, the title of this, yes.
And beverage. So what's the role?
Yeah, I can maybe say. Yeah, so beverage is one of the category that has seen more growth than any other category of food when it comes to nutrient dense or proteins. So you think about plant-based milks. That's an incredible growth. There's so much of growth there. And now comes all the sustainable technologies like non-dairy proteins is one of the big area where precision fermentation has done very well, but also biomass fermentation has also done very well. So those two areas, I think beverages are now loaded with proteins. Used to be a ceiling at 20 grams of protein. Is serving now, I'm seeing 40 grams of protein in a beverage. So this category is evolving, it's great.
Yep, I think we've seen some bioactive protein products as well, enzymes as well produced using precision fermentation for use in beverages is also something that we've encountered.
Hello. Had a question for you. So much of the money is spent upstream and downstream. How can the technology itself, the bioreactors, be the positive implications of just increasing the production? Is there, are there companies out there that are doing that, just actually creating more efficient bioreactors?
I think it's a great question because many companies, you saw the list I put there, include Geltor and companies like, there's so many companies we know who have seen limited growth because of, the infrastructure requirement is there. And many companies were successful in raising money from the venture capital. But then what? If the plant is not able to produce the volumes cost effectively, it's a big challenge. And there are many examples of that. But there are some good examples also where it worked. I think Marlow Foods, I used an example because they were the first ones in 1980s to really build a continuous fermentation plant that is producing protein for, I think, anywhere between $7 to $12 a kilo already. And then you saw 3F Bio, which is Abunda, is the trademark of the protein. They put a brand new plant in a very nice site selection work they did where there is over the fence agreements, and I'm just saying based on the reports I read. And so they have done very well. And then Perfect Day, I hear they continue to do good. They still have a long way to go where the cost needs to be reduced further. But if you think about it, it all depends on the product. Whey protein that we use from dairy industry can cost anywhere between $10 to $25 a kilo. So there's a opportunity there.
Yeah, I will just comment that I know that there is a lot of companies struggle when they're trying to move from that pilot to scale up procedure to find space where they can, like a CMO that they can produce under, because they're not at the stage of creating their own plant. That's just my only comment, I guess, on that. Is there seems to be a lack of infrastructure or availability. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Baljeet. Andrew, really appreciate you taking the time. Let's give him a round of applause again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for attending this session, and I really, really appreciate you being here at Supply Side West and Food Ingredients North America.